So of course, as you can see by the link when you registered and by the slide that is on our screen at the moment, today we're going to be talking about accessibility and more specifically around the countdown to WCAG 2.2, so the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Yep. All right, so if you just want to kick ahead, awesome. So as usual, a bit of quick housekeeping just before we start. So please do feel free to use the live transcription from Zoom. And then of course as well, the recording, you'll get the recording after this session, probably in a couple of days along with the slides, and that will have closed captioning as well. And we do encourage questions and comments of all kinds. So please do feel free to use the chat box, use the questions and answer feature, and we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end where we can kind of go through everything all together. Just a quick introduction as well. So some of you might know me. I'm Kynez. I am the account manager at Monsido. And Clarence, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yep. Hey, I'm Clarence. I'm one of the customer success managers here at Monsido. Some of you also may know me. But I wear a lot of hats, but my main focus here in Australia is to assist our customers here in the APAC region with getting the most out of Monsido, out of the platform. Outside of this, I am also a front-end web developer. I love to build slick, exciting, interactive websites and web applications. And I should also preface by saying that while I know that this is an accessibility webinar, I cannot consult, but I do help in breaking down the accessibility checkpoints inside Monsido. So if you're an existing customer, I probably have already worked with you in terms of just looking at the code, provide recommendations on how to make your website more accessible.
Amazing. And yeah, just having a look at the participants list, I do see a lot of familiar names as well. So I'm sure we do have a lot of familiar faces here who hopefully already know us. A bit of an agenda for what we'll be covering today as well. So we're going to be focusing on why we should pay attention to WCAG 2.2 and what this kind of means, what the difference is between 2.0 versus 2.1 versus 2.2. And we're going to have a bit of a more, a more in-depth overview of what the new WCAG 2.2 checks are. So we'll actually have a bit of a video component from Lars, who is one of our accessibility experts based in Denmark. And even though he was totally keen to join, sitting in his pajamas and cocoa in bed at 3 a.m., we thought maybe we should just record his session and play it here today rather than have him join live. So I hope that's okay. And we'll be having that a little later. And then we're going to also talk about how to actually tackle a web accessibility compliance and what some best practices might be. And then, of course, a Q&A session at the end. Cool. So just to start, as always, a quick pulse check. Hopefully we haven't lost anyone just yet. So we'll do a bit of a quick pulse check and a bit of a poll just to see what level of WCAG you are trying to comply with today. Are you trying to comply with 2.0, 2.1, or 2.2? Let me just launch that. Awesome. And as always as well, feel free to comment in the comments below, why are you trying to strive for 2.1? Why are you trying to strive for 2.0 or 2.2, for instance, or for any other? Please drop it in the chat as well.
Getting a lot of 2.1s and 2.2s, which is a good sign.
Yeah,
on the latest
really
version.
Good.
No 4.0s yet, unfortunately.
Might be a few years away from that one.
Yeah.
But I will keep an eye on the chat just in case, right? Okay, yep. I'm seeing pretty much heavily skewed towards 2.1, so that makes sense. It's up till now the most recent version, so it's good to see that a lot of people are really striving towards having this compliance. Amanda has said mostly trying to comply with 2.1 due to it being the currently released one. The goal would be to switch to 2.2. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's kind of what we're hearing across the board as well, that people are obviously trying to comply with typically the most up-to-date version, so 2.1, with eyes on being able to switch and sort of basically absorb those new checks as well, and making sure that we're compliant to that as well. So it makes a lot of sense. I think that's, yeah. Oh, Kit has said, in the planning stages for a new web app, so it makes sense to strive for 2.2. Definitely makes sense. Well, best of luck for the new web app as well. Cool. Yep. pretty consistent across the board. Awesome. Cool. Karis, I'll let you kick off as well for the next section if you'd like.
Yep, all good. Sorry, I'm just fighting my mouse. Cool. So why should we pay attention to WCAG 2.2? Why is it so important for accessibility? And before we even tackle 2.2, I think it's important to take a step back and first understand what these standards are. The WCAG is a set of guidelines developed by W3C, who by which create a lot of the standards and technologies that we use on the internet today. And these guidelines help to ensure that web content is indeed accessible to everyone, including people with disabilities. And I really just want to reinforce that it is a broad set of guidelines because it is an international standard. And also it's supposed to cover a large scope and a whole range of disabilities. Because when we often talk about digital accessibility, I'm not too sure about you, but at least for me, even I know that I'm guilty of this as well, but I'm naturally gravitating. I'm always thinking about blind or visually impaired people, but what about, those with hearing disabilities, cognitive disabilities, motor disabilities, and even temporary disabilities as well? So in certain situations where something, unfortunate may happen to you, where you might find it temporarily difficult to use your computer or use your device, the broadness of these standards is really meant to cater to that. Hence why there are over 170 and I guess now over 180 accessibility checkpoints to review. So in terms of why, I think there are a few reasons why digital accessibility should be important to you and why it should be something front of mind, especially if you are owning your website. Not only is it a legal requirement, I know here in Australia, particularly around Australian governments, we need to hit 2.0 level AA. It's not only for a legal requirement, but it also is a business and ethical, not really requirement, but benefit as well. And by making your website more accessible, you essentially expand your audience, you improve your reputation, but honestly, it really is just simply the right thing to do. So I'll move on to the next one. And for WCAG, and you might also hear me refer to it as WCAG or WCAG, but the main principles of WCAG is, sorry, one sec. Am I on the right slide? Yep. No, actually, sorry, I actually forgot to go ahead on one slide. This is the one that we want, but the main principles of WCAG is, when we dig a little bit deeper in WCAG, we can approach from two ways. So it has 3 levels of checkpoints. I'm sure most of you are kind of already familiar with these checkpoints, and these levels are level A, level AA, and level AAA. And these levels are a measure of standards or criteria websites can adhere to. And from a legal perspective, again, most organizations, at least here in Australia, are required to meet 2.0 level AA. And it actually says in the legislation too, that it is recommended to push for 2.1 or 2.2, which is going to be coming out very soon. So level A is that minimum standard, while level AA and level AAA are subsets of the guidelines. They essentially add on to level A based on the context of how users are browsing content online, as well as its time of iteration. And I also just want to talk about each of these levels a little bit deeper because I personally get this question all the time. What are the differences? And level A is really that minimum level of accessibility compliance. It ensures your content is most accessible to many people with disabilities and also including those who are using assistive technologies. Level AA contains more advanced accessibility requirements. It meets an even wider range of people with disabilities. And here you're now starting to review checkpoints for those with low vision, color blindness, cognitive disabilities. And level AAA is the highest level of accessibility conformance. Basically, it covers a widest range of people with disabilities. And I should note that while AAA is ideal, it often is not possible for websites to achieve. And that's why it's important to know what you or your team is responsible for and also capable of achieving. Because, when we're developing websites, when we're looking at websites, when we're reviewing the content, you also don't want to compromise the user experience of your website for able-bodied visitors as well. So it's kind of like finding that middle ground. You need to understand or need to find the middle ground between all levels and across all the checkpoints. And if you had to ask me, it really is a whole organization effort. You need to meet with your developers. You need to meet with your content authors or owners, and maybe perhaps some of you in this call today are one of those. And you may also need to meet with your marketing and UX team as well. And another way to also understand the WCAG guidelines is to look at it from its hierarchy. So at the very top, you're going to see 4 principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And below that, you're going to see guidelines. And below that, again, you're going to see success criteria at the bottom. So when we're testing websites, using Monsido, we actually use the success criteria, which are constructed with the 4 principles in mind. And it's worth noting that this hierarchy applies to all WCAG guidelines, whether you are using 2.0, 2.1, 2.2, 3.0 in the future. So yeah, it's always worthwhile just kind of understanding these principles, because it will help you in actually fixing content on your site. Cool. And why is the release of 2.2 so important? So you can probably already kind of guess why it's so important. But the long and short of it is that the internet is rapidly developing. It really is not the same as it once was, at least back in 2008 when the first version of 2.0 came out. And of course, at that time, we did not have websites developed with mobile usage in mind. We did not have developers thinking about responsive design or web applications or designing websites for a certain look and feel, or at least it wasn't as nearly as mature as it is today. I remember having a conversation with one of my customers who's actually in this call today last week about the future of WCAG and the future of WCAG and where we're headed. And we're talking about how everything's going to be mobile because we were looking at the statistics. And we found that around 80% of viewers and visitors are using their mobile phones. So you have to start thinking about, well, how do we make our website accessible for those people who are indeed using a mobile phone? And fortunately, if you're a customer from with Monsido, you have accessibility scanning for mobile devices. And so on that note, until the push of mobile phones and between 2008 and 2018, we have 2.1. And yeah, here it's currently the standard. And this is now to cover all the cases for those who are disabled should they move from desktop to mobile. And now, of course, with 2.2, I should mention as well that, WCAG is designed to be very broad. I did mention this before. And while there are a few checkpoints in relation to cognitive disabilities, now we've got more. So now you can actually test for this here. And Lars is going to cover this in the next few slides as well. But the long and short of it, in summary, the whole new standard of 2.2 is really aimed towards those with cognitive impairments. And of course, users with low vision and users with disabilities using mobile devices as well. Cool. And I'll throw this back to you, Kai.
Sure. Yeah, no, thank you for such a good detailed walkthrough as well around the importance of accessibility and some of those key differences through, I guess, that evolution of 2.0 up till now, up till 2.2 coming out. Another way that obviously it is so important to kind of keep track of, if you are in the digital space, if you are any kind of a content producer or editor or anything in that kind of space, is that it's important to be aware of what the actual accessibility acts and legislations are as they pertain to you. So I know that a lot of people joining today are probably from the APAC region, so a lot from Singapore, where they've got the Singapore Enabling Master Plan, for instance. of 2030, where the goal from the government is that all these websites will be accessible to a level of 2.0 or 2.1 by 2030. I believe Ada, our colleague who I've done webinars with in the past, she did a webinar specifically for the Singaporean audience on accessibility late last year, for instance. And then, of course, in Australia and in New Zealand, we've got the Disability Discrimination Act of 1992 and the New Zealand Human Rights Act as well. So making sure that you understand, if you are in any of these spaces, what levels you need to comply with based on, yes, what Clarence was saying in terms of your organizational goals, your target audience, what your website actually looks like and functions like, but also what you actually have to adhere to as well in terms of the compliance side of things as well. So, you know, you might have a goal to achieve this level of compliance, and then the level of compliance that's kind of mandated regulatory, you know, through the regulation might be a little bit different as well. So trying to find that kind of balance as well is always really important. And then again, we're going to go a little bit more into what the difference is between 2.0 versus 2.1 versus 2.2. So I know that Clarence has already given us a really in-depth overview of this, and we're going to kind of go down into Lars's video portion as well, where he'll cover a couple of slides and go through what a lot of these specific checks are for 2.2 and what they mean and what that kind of, like, what examples there are and what the general use case is of that. So in terms of what to know about 2.2 is that obviously it's different. A lot of these checks are legacy checks. They've already existed since 2020. They're always being reviewed every time a new version and a new iteration comes out. So sometimes we'll see familiar checks from before, sometimes we'll see lots of new checks. So for instance, you can see in this bit of a flow chart, you know, 2.0 had 61 success criteria, and then 2.1 had 17 new criteria on top of that. And then now we've got those 78 from 2.1 plus 9 new criteria as well. So it's important to kind of keep track of what that means, what the differences are, and those differences reflect as well the digital space more broadly today and what is seen more broadly today in terms of, you know, in terms of common accessibility needs, for instance. So the expectation is that a lot of that legislation that I mentioned earlier is obviously as current as it can be. So the expectation is that eventually any legislation that still references 2.1 or even some that still references 2.0, that will eventually switch and start to refer to 2.2 as well. So it's always important, and I'm sure you all know this as well, it's always important to kind of make sure that you're striving for the newest so that you're not left rushing from the rear when it suddenly switches over to a new level, for instance. We've seen people come in and they've had to bump up their compliance level in really, really short timeframes, and that does not look fun, and it's really difficult to do as well. I'm sure you've worked alongside a lot of people who have had really short timeframes, sometimes as short as 2 weeks, to make sure that their whole site is as compliant as it can be, which is very difficult because, of course, accessibility is an ongoing thing. It's not just about after the site content is live, it's about ongoing maintenance and education and understanding how to make the content as accessible in the first place, as well as being able to keep track of it after it's published live. With that as well, I think it's a good time to kind of focus on some of these new checks as well. So Lars will go through a couple of slides around what some of these checks are and what they mean for us. Clarence, if you want to just kind of stop sharing and then share the video, that would be great.
Of course. Give me 2 seconds. I am fighting my mouse here again, but give me
technical issues.
Yeah.
While Clarence does bring that up, if anyone has any comments or anything that they'd love to pop into the chat, I've seen a couple of questions and comments come through, which is really good to see. But yeah, are there any sort of checks or anything that anyone is particularly excited for or hoping to see? Let us know.
Cool. Do you see that?
Yep, I can see it. I'll give you a thumbs up if we can hear it.
Okay, I'll fire away.
So next part, I want to give an overview of what is actually new in that new version of WCAG. We have a bunch of new success criteria. I'll give you the overview. Also, I want to say it is really an overview because there are many more details when you get into it. And if you need to understand more of the details, I really recommend you go into the WCAG standard and read for each success criteria in there, they have this how to understand document, and that's really the place to go to really to understand all the small details of what's in it. But for now, I will give you an introduction to where is it you need to start to be to look out for things in this new version. So let's jump straight to the next slide. So the first one is what we call accessible authentication, and this is one of the new criteria in here. So what is this authentication? That's really, I mean, whenever you have something where your user have to authenticate themselves, typically, you know, when they are logging into your website or creating a new account on your website or something like that, you don't want the user should not have to perform what we call a cognitive function test. So that really means, that could be many different things, but as an example, for example, you don't want it should not be so your user cannot log in without, for example, adding two numbers together. Sometimes you see some tests saying like to prove that you are human, and there would be a test saying something like, what is 25 plus 26? And you have to answer that. That would be one example of a cognitive function test. Another example would be something like, for example, having to remember your password. And to remember the password, of course, you need to know what is your password, but you have to understand it in this way. Sometimes, for example, people who have some cognitive limitations, they would perhaps typically store their passwords in a password manager or in some separate place. And in that case, if you could not copy paste your password into the password field in your website, sometimes websites, by scripts, they block from pasting text into the password field. Then it would mean that the user would actually have to remember or to transcribe from like the original storage place of the password and into your password field. So if you have something like this where there are any of these cognitive function tests, then at least you need to have some mechanisms or some alternative ways to authenticate if you have something like that. Yeah, I think that's what we take for this one. Can we take the next slide, Jasmine?
Yes.
Which is consistent help. And consistent help, that really means if you have some kind of help functionality on your website, that could be just a help button to request help, or it could be the contact information to where you find the phone number or the contact details or anything like that. That has to be placed in the same relative order on your website, or like on all of the subsites on your website. So, for example, you would not, if you have your phone number contact information like in the right side of your footer on one page, you would not suddenly want to have it in the left side of your footer on the next page. And obviously this should help really everybody so they don't have to figure out on a side-by-side basis where to look for your contact or help information. But specifically, it's important for people, again, who has some, like, for example, cognitive limitations. Or it could be really valuable for someone like me, also who uses a screen reader, and where usually it takes longer time to get the overview of the page. So it's like, for someone like me, it would be really annoying if I know where to look for the help button on one page, and I would have to locate it again in a new position on the next page. Yeah. So we take the next one. And this is the one about dragging movements. And what we mean by dragging movements, it's when you have something, usually when you have, for example, if you're using your mouse to click somewhere, to drag a slider and release, for example, on the picture here, we have some kind of color picker. with some different sliders to adjust the colors. There's some RGB. Let's say you want to adjust the red color. And let's say right now, for example, it's on 40% and you want to put it up to 80%. And if you would do that by dragging, that's really multiple actions you're performing. First, you would put your mouse pointer to the 40%, then you would click it, then you would hold the mouse button, and then while still holding, you would drag it up to 80%, and then you would release. And that combined action of clicking, holding down, dragging in a specific direction, and then releasing again, that performance could be, or that action could be really difficult to perform to someone with, let's say, for example, some mobility impairments in the hands, someone who can't use the hands very well, or who have some, like, anything that makes a hand shakes or stuff like that. So we want to have a single pointer mode to do this, and a single pointer that's just another way of saying you have to be able to do this on the same spot. A single pointer is when if you imagine you just click on one spot with your mouse, or if you do a double click or something, but you don't move the mouse. And in this case, the easy way to understand it here, rather than having to drag all the way from 40% up to 80%, perhaps you could achieve the same just by pointing the mouse pointer at 80% and just click while you have it on 80%, and it will just jump in position there. So that would be like a standard way of meeting this success criteria here. Yeah. And let's go to the next one, focus appearance.
Yes, we're there.
And yeah, it's focus appearance. And first we need to talk about keyboard navigation, because all of you who are already doing a lot of good work in accessibility, you probably already know that your website, it has to be keyboard accessible. You need to be able to navigate tapping from element to element with your keyboard. And for that to work, you really need to know when you're tapping around what is actually in focus right now. Which link will I activate if I hit the enter or the space button? And therefore we have what we call the focus indicator. So that's typically like a rectangular shape around the element that is in focus. And we already have now from 2.0 and 2.1 some requirement that says, well, the keyboard focus indicator, that must be visible. The problem today is it does not say how visible does it need to be. So in theory, and what we also see in reality, I've been testing really a huge number of websites over the last many years, and I've sometimes seen cases where you do have this keyboard focus indicator, but in some cases it's really just one single pixel that has like a slightly different color from the background. So in theory it's visible, but it's, for most people in all reality, it's impossible from any practical perspective. So what this new success criteria adds, it's some rules for how visible does it actually have to be, and there are, so it says like the first thing is really you have to make the focus indicator surround the entire elements. There are some exceptions from that, but in general you need your focus indicator not just to be one single pixel, you need it to surround the elements. And then there are certain requirements for the contrast also, which we did not have before. So it does not work to have like very light gray focus indicator on a white background. Also previous, when you had some, and I think this is where, for example, if you're a designer, you would need to pay a little bit attention to this one, because early on there were also, it was actually okay if you did not, from the design or development perspective, if you did not adjust the visual appearance of the focus indicator. You could have cases where it was actually not visible, but it would still pass the success criteria before. For example, let's say you have a website with a blue background. And in Chrome, the default focus indicator, that's a blue rectangle. That would in reality give you like a blue focus indicator on a blue background, and you would not be able to see that. And as it was before, that was actually okay as long as you did not yourself adjust the default focus indicators, blue color. That will not work anymore. So because now we have these requirements for that there still have to be like proper contrast. As long as you, as an author, edit either the focus indicator color or the background color, so basically the color of the web page, if you are deciding any of these and not using the defaults for these, then you will be responsible for enough contrast between the focus indicator and the background now.
I can add something over here, super small. The other day I learned that a friend of mine has this color, I don't know what is, not like he can't see the green and the red, the green and the blue
It's
when they're
like a red-green color deficiency.
Not red green color, the blue and the green when they're together, he see them as one color.
Yeah.
So I was just like, oh wow, I never heard about it. I heard about color deficiency, but not exactly that example. And he's like, that's why when the websites are so closely blue and green together, I see one color. And this will be like a good example to check with the color contrasts.
Yeah, good point. Thanks for that, Graciela. So let's jump to the next one, focus, not obscured. And that's about the focus indicator. We already talked about what is the focus indicator when you're navigating with the keyboard. You can have some situations where your focus indicator is actually hiding between some other elements on your website. Let's say you have like some kind of pop-up window, a cookie banner, or it could be, I think another good example, many websites, they have these sticking headers or sticking footers where like the footer of the page is always visible. So when you scroll down the page, it kind of scrolls down behind the footer, which is always there. And this new requirement, it says that if your focus indicator is, there always has to be like a part of your focus indicator that is visible. It does not work if your focus indicator gets completely hidden behind some other elements that shows up on the page, because again, then you would not know as a keyboard user, where are you actually on the page. Then we have the redundant entry. That's the next slide. And redundant entry. Let's say you have some kind of process where you are filling out some data in a form. That could be like in this example we have here, like a checkout process, like in a web shop, for example, but it could be other stuff. Whenever your user has to enter the same information twice, you want it to, or your solution should really help the user either by automatically just re-entering the data or at least give your user an option to like automatically submit or not submit, but enter the data you entered in previous steps. The example we have here, and that's really one that I often see, like for example, when you have like you're entering your invoicing address in a checkout process, and then afterwards you have to enter your billing address, and you have probably seen this before. Then you get this little checkbox just saying, I want to use the same data. An example of fulfilling this new success criteria. And again, this is really beneficial for people with several cognitive disabilities for whom it can take a lot of time actually to fill out these forms. But it would also be really beneficial for someone like me who's blind, and when I fill out all these forms with my screen reader, that also it takes much more time. So for me, it's also really convenient not to have to re-enter the same kind of data over and over again. And if we take the next one, target size, and I think it's the last one actually I have here. Target size, now we have some, or we will start to have some limitations on how small can our targets be. So the hit target, this is whenever we are talking about anything you can interact with, click or press, like all the buttons and stuff you have on your website. There will just be some minimum sizes for these ones. And again, if you're thinking about people who have difficulties with their hands, who are perhaps who has, like, for example, a lot of pain in their hands, or like a tremor in their hands, or stuff like that, when you have tiny checkboxes or anything like that, it can be really easy to actually hit the wrong target, like press the wrong button, really. So this is to ensure that you will get enough space either on the target itself, or at least surrounded by enough free space until the next button, so you will not by accident hit something wrong on that. And I think while we are on this one, I don't know, Jasmine, if you would share the story about your granddad. I saw you posted a story yesterday about your granddad when he's using his mobile phone. Is that correct?
Exactly. So he has a hereditary neurological condition, which means he has some tremors in his hand and actually has lost the sensation in his fingers. So it's really, really hard for him to navigate on his mobile device. So what I've done is I've enabled the accessibility feature of enlarging the font, which is great for him to navigate, but it does not enlarge the buttons. And that can be very, very frustrating for him, because he'll try to hit a button and he'll accidentally hit the article next to the button he's trying to press. And I put up a video on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, then you'll be able to see the video of him trying to navigate that. And it's just a really good example of why this criteria is so important.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that one, Jasmine. I thought it just made perfect sense just to mention it here. This was the last one of the success criteria that I wanted to talk about here.
Cool. All right. Thank you everyone for the feedback that you did post. We were looking at the chat as well. I'm not sure why it was showing up as blurry on your end, but considering how many people have said it, it looks like that was an issue. So I do apologize for that. I hope that it hasn't affected your ability to still understand the content too much, but you will get the slides as well as the recording after the session. So you'll be able to review all of those slides that Lars has gone through afterwards as well.
Amazing. So right now, let's look at how we can tackle our website accessibility compliance. And I'll move to the next slide. So the very first thing that we can do is to audit our website. So when we start to tackle web accessibility, even before you look at your website, even before you look at Monsido, you should identify what legislation and WCAG standards apply to your own organization. But honestly, as a rule of thumb, just try to be on the latest version and know what your minimum standards are though. So again, I know I keep bringing this up just because I work with a lot of government customers, but in government, level AA is where you want to sit at. And from here, you can use tools like Monsido to determine where you are compliant, where you need improvement, and where you are indeed failing. But keep in mind that there are a lot of checkpoints for 2.2. As I mentioned before, there are over 180 checkpoints, right? And I just want to be very, very transparent with you. These are a lot. And that's why I mentioned before, it is oftentimes an organizational effort to audit your website. And this leads me into the perfect segue for the next slide, which is prioritization of your website content. And customers always ask me how best to prioritize their time when reviewing accessibility checkpoints. They've got a whole heap of other things that they need to do. So when they are reviewing accessibility checkpoints, how do they get the most out of their time? How do they get the most bang for their buck? And one way is to just fix the most important and popular pages first. And inside Monsido, there's actually a view where you can filter for your most important pages first. And this ranking is determined by the number of page visits, and you can work that way. But another way is, and the way that I actually recommend, is to investigate single pages first. And this could very well be a popular page. So take, for example, your home page, and fix the global elements on that particular page. So what I mean by this is to find an important page, review an accessibility checkpoint that you may understand or can actually fix and review. And if that checkpoint contains HTML elements elsewhere across your website, when you fix that HTML element, you're actually fixing it across your entire website, or at least wherever that HTML element appears. So, you can make your nav bar, your header, your side nav, your footer, or any other component that is that exists elsewhere across your website accessible first, because they are global elements. And the very last way is to, just get the simple tasks out of the way first. Like, having a look at reviewing your alt text, fix the ones that you can actually understand. And inside Monsido, you can actually filter based on your role. So let's just say, for example, you're a developer, or you're a content author or owner, or a UX designer. You can see the checkpoints that are most relevant to you. And from here, you can tackle the ones that are the most easy to fix. And again, the ones that maybe you aren't necessarily responsible for, you can download reports and then share that to the wider team. Cool. And that's over to you, Kai.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So now that we've had a look at, okay, like we're auditing our content, we've understood where the accessibility opportunities lie and what those opportunities are, and we've figured out how to prioritize our content as well. It's really important to kind of continue that maintained, sustained approach to accessibility as well. And a really good way to do that as well is by identifying an accessibility champion. So have some kind of person, some kind of internal resource that's really dedicated to the initiative. If you have, there's always the issue just with anything of, someone else will get to it. If you have the dishes in the sink, someone else will get to it. It's fine. And if you don't have, a champion who's in charge of those dishes or is in charge of the accessibility, it might not happen. So we want to make sure that we have someone who's on top of what the actual legislation is, who's not only just checking in to see what it is, but regularly checking in to check in on if it changes and what those legislations mean for you, identifying what the changes that need to happen and how they need to happen, and to ensure some accountability as well. So this could be through delegation of tasks. For instance, maybe one team is focusing on some checks and accessibility or some sections of the website, for instance, and then the team are getting continual training. And that could be something like this, like why is it actually important? Why is the accessibility so important, and what changes need to be made, as well as how do we make those changes, not just after the content is already published and that we're going through those legacy pages, but also before it actually is published in the first place. So again, using alt text is a really, really great example, making sure that we're adding that in while the content is still in draft format before it's published in the first place. And that saves a lot of headache from anyone trying to access the site, because they're able to just access it straight away and have the best user experience that they can. And it's also saving a lot of headache on the content producer side as well. So you don't have to go back and delegate extra tasks and extra timing to fix previous issues. And you're also not getting any complaints, and you're fine in terms of a compliance standpoint as well. But then in terms of that as well, it's also really important to set up some realistic goals and milestones for your organization. So what, based on the resources that you currently have, you might have, brand-wise goals, which is always fantastic with accessibility, but it's really important to make sure that we're keeping track of what can we actually achieve with the time and resources that we have. Like, yes, we would love to do this and be at this level, but what can we realistically, achieve right now? And how can we achieve that? And do we need to sort of reflect after a month and see how we've been performing and what our KPIs are? Maybe we might have to sort of take a step back and say, hey, this is taking a little longer than we expected. How can we sort of navigate that? And how do we change our plans around that to make sure that it's still a continued, investment, something that we're still working on, even though it might take a little longer than expected. And then for that as well, so whenever there are any you know, whenever there's any feedback or whenever there's anything that we're working on, we want to make sure that we're actually making the right choices and having the best impact. So with that as well, we want to set up a feedback loop, you know, and it could be something like, do you have an accessibility statement on your website? And that's actually a really great question. You know, in our day-to-day, Clarence and I, we speak to a lot of people with a lot of websites, and we look at a lot of websites, you know, days and days and days of websites. And it's really surprisingly common how uncommon it is to see an accessibility statement on a website. So I guess that's my question to everyone here. Do you have a statement on your website? Is this something that you're looking into? Is this something that you have looked into? You know, it's just like a privacy policy, but it helps to provide a lot more information to make sure that your site visitors are as informed as they can be of how to best navigate your site. I can also show your compliance history and your compliance goals as well, especially if you have any kind of legislation that you have to abide by as well. Even if you're not quite at that level yet, it says, hey, we are aware that we need to be at this level and we're working on it. And that alone is just miles ahead of just not having one in the first place. As well as that as well, you want to make sure that your site visitors have a way to contact you if something's not quite working. It could be something that you're not quite aware of, but something that could be genuinely affecting a lot of people who just don't know how to communicate it to you because there isn't a feedback loop or a way to provide that feedback. We've got a couple of people in the chat saying, yep, that they have that. So it's great that you have an accessibility statement on the site as well. And then we've got a couple of resources just to get you started. So our accessibility handbook is usually a crowd favorite. So that's a really great in-depth but kind of summarized place to start as well. And as always as well, so these slides will be sent to you after this session, probably in a few days' time, alongside with the recording and the transcript as well. So you'll be able to click these links and access all of this content also afterwards. As if you can see as well, there is an accessibility statement generator on our site. So if you don't currently have an accessibility statement and you're just not quite sure where to start, it's a great way to kind of toggle and create a bit of a generic accessibility statement that you can then completely customize and make it fit to your own brand as well. So that's a really good place to start also. And then as always, we'd love to help. So I'm going to launch another poll. Yes, that's right. It is poll time. So we'd love to help. So let us know. What are you interested in? Are you interested in getting a free scan of your website, seeing a demo of our accessibility module? So our accessibility module will scan the whole site in accordance with all of these WCAG guidelines. And we also have the 2.2 version in draft as well. So you can see what your site will look like in terms of that upcoming compliance level. Finding out if your website is WCAG 2.2 compliant as well, or all of the above. I'll just leave that open as well to allow people lots of time to respond. And I think in the meantime, shall we look at some questions, Clarence?
Yes, let's take a look at some questions.
Awesome. I'm just looking in the chat. So we've got a question from Sonia, who says it would be helpful to know what levels, so A, AA, AAA, these new requirements relate to. It's actually a really good question. So these, so that there is extra, I think it was 9 success criteria that Lars went through. It's kind of a mix of different levels. So for instance, I think the consistent help point that Lars mentioned, where we want to make sure that that help, you know, the way to ask for help and to contact, you know, find that contact information on a site, that's a level A compliance reading. And then for instance, you know, some of that focus appearance, it kind of crosses over into multiple. So the point that Lars made around the website being navigable by a keyboard and having those focus elements focused with like a border, some of those checks were from AA and some of them were from AAA. So there's kind of a bit of overlap there as well of getting deeper into it. So it is a bit of a mix. Let me know if you want more of an in-depth conversation around all of those checks and which levels they do fall into, and we'd be happy to do that as well. Cool. I'll have a look at the Q&A as well. So, yep, someone said, sorry if I missed it. When will 2.2 come out? That's a very good question. I think the W3C was set to launch it back in December last year, and it did get pushed back a little bit to early this year. So it's anticipated that it will be coming out very, very shortly, and that's why this webinar is happening now as well, just in the you know, in the lead up to that. But I don't know of a specific date, apart from the fact that it should be within the next few weeks or months. So very, very soon. Clarence, this might be a question for you as well. So someone's asked, if we are a small team and we don't have much technical knowledge, what can we do to address accessibility?
That's a great point, and a conversation that I often have with customers as well. If you are a small team and you aren't able to get developers on board, or you don't quite know HTML or CSS, what you can do is just to work on, well, firstly, set realistic goals, as Kaina has mentioned. Figure out, look at the checklist, understand the ones that you can actually do. So maybe you could use Monsido to make and run a filter to check for the checkpoints that you can actually understand and fix, and work on those first. Because I think the main goal here is not to hit a certain number. You're not going to be 100% accessibility compliant, perhaps, right? So the whole goal here is to make an effort to get as close to being accessibility compliant. And I think there's another question here is, can we get your details for contact and consultations and assistance if needed? Yes, after this call, you'll get all of our details, as well as there's also our information and our LinkedIn's at the very last slide as well.
Yep, we've got a question from Mark Branston. Again, this might be a little bit more of a question for you, Clarence. So looking at Monsido's scan of our site, one of the errors I'm seeing reads, alt text for all image elements is the empty string and then the brackets colon. If the image is decorative, what does it mean? It is showing on a page where images have alt text.
Yeah, so this one here, alt text for all image elements is empty string if the image is decorative. So you have to understand what the image is doing on your website. Is it supposed to provide context as to what exactly the image is, and is it supposed to read out to someone that is using a screen reader? If it's just decorative and you don't want that image to be read out to whoever's using a screen reader, then you want to use an empty string, and that's just the quotations. But Mark, good call out. I'll reach out to you directly with more information on that one.
Awesome, thank you, Clarence. There's a question from Kit as well. So how do we balance WCAG color contrast requirements against certain populations that need smaller contrast ratios? That one's just in a Q&A box.
Gotcha. How do we balance WCAG color contrast requirements against certain populations that need smaller contrast ratio? That's an interesting one. I might have to get some more advice from Lars regarding that one. I know that you can use color contrast checkers inside the tool as well as the free tools that you can see online, but in terms of certain populations that need smaller contrast ratios, that's the first I've ever heard of it, if I'm honest. But I will, yeah, leave that one with me, and I can check in with Lars and get back to you on that one, Kit.
Yeah, at any point as well, if anyone does have any questions after the session as well, you're always welcome to reach out to us if you have anything further that you wanted to talk about, if you wanted more context or more of a personalized conversation around accessibility on your website as well. We've got Lottie with a question. So when I ran an accessibility check of my website, some things that came up were theme or plugin related. What should I do? I tried speaking to my learning management system plugin provider and they didn't know what to do about it.
So I'm just going to read that one again. So some things came up where it was a theme or plugin related. I need to have a look myself, but what I will say is that I think I've actually run into this, not necessarily an issue, but it's more of a review item in, like, at least in the checkpoints in Monsido. And you may need to simply review it, and it could be something that you can just ignore in the platform. But I need to put my eyes on it, and I need to check the code myself. So yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly for that one as well.
Cool. Cigar has asked, is there a checklist of all 180 points on Monsido? Like, it would be great if we can see the checklist for 2.2 and see which ones do we meet. For 2.2, I don't think so. Sagar, if you're a current user, I don't think 2.2 would already be enabled, but we do have it in a draft format, so it can be turned on for like auditing and demo purposes, just to sort of be able to see where it's standing in terms of that, but it wouldn't automatically be on. Hopefully that answers your question. John has asked, one of our internal websites utilizes SharePoint Online. It's not possible to provide alt text for inbuilt navigation elements, for example, down arrows to open drop-down menu lists, unless and until Microsoft addresses this site would never be compliant.
Yeah,
That's
that's true. If your CMS or if SharePoint doesn't give you the ability to, is there an asset library that you could review inside your CMS or SharePoint where you can add alt text to it? If not, that is okay. You can always, like if you're in the context or lens of Monsido, you can always unignore certain checks. So you can ignore it for now. And that way you can just kind of put it out of sight for now and then review it again later down the line when you have the ability to.
Thank you for that, Clarence. I'll just give it another moment if there are any more questions hopping through. Either everyone is thinking very hard or no one has any more questions. You're welcome, Sagar. You're welcome, John. You're welcome, Amanda. John, Clarence, I think you've got a response from John, who said Microsoft does not give users access to internal asset libraries, only to user created libraries.
I see. Yeah, in that case, you just have to think about what you are responsible and what is within scope. If you can't do it, unfortunately, you really can't do it, right? It may be a conversation for your developers, but if you can't have that conversation, or if you aren't close or working with your development team, then it's something that you can ignore for now and then review it later.
It's really good to see people offering each other advice as well, and some questions in the chat and seeing this. Cool. I might give it a few more seconds in case any last minute questions come through, but I am just being mindful of the time as well. It's just almost 2 o'clock now, so I don't want to keep anyone from, I'm sure, what is a very busy end of month period. So thank you everyone for joining. I've still got my eyes on the chat, don't worry, in case anyone wants to say anything. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining today. I really hope today's session was very useful for you. As always, please reach out to us if you do have any other questions or if you do need anything else from our end in the meantime as well.